Hello, everyone. This is a little talk about the CRA and open source project security baseline from the OpenSSF, and hopefully a few other things that will be interesting, especially if you're an open source maintainer. How many folks here are maintainers? Nice. How many of you have any formal security or compliance training? Hey, that's more than I expected. Who has a security badge on their project? Okay, you're doing better than average. So for those of you who aren't familiar with it, in 2024, so about a year ago, the EU Cyber Resilience Act was signed into law, and as far as I'm aware, this is one of the first general purpose digital products laws that actually has fines for shipping insecure devices. And so if you are selling a product in the EU that has digital components, you're expected to meet requirements on these 9 pillars. And I'm not going to read them all out to you, but it's a regulation. There's lots of words, I promise. Fortunately, sell is one of the key words here. And if you're doing open source, you're exempt. You're not making money off of it. If you are making money off of it, if you're selling support services or something like that, you may want to brush up and see if EU might be coming for 2.5% of your gross revenues is the maximum penalty under the law, which is kind of serious. On the other hand, because it is kind of serious, you may find manufacturers asking questions to you about your security practices. Think about how you want to respond. You're not required to give them anything. You can say, go away. On the other hand, that may mean that your project gets less use and adoption over time. You may, on the other hand, say, every single user is important to us. You've got a survey that you want us to fill out about security practices. We'll do it. And then, some other manufacturer comes along and says, would you fill out this survey? And, you've got 10 or 20 surveys pretty soon that you're filling out in your nights and weekends rather than working on your open source software. Probably your best answer is somewhere in between. The one I, in my selfish heart of hearts, want to say is contribute, and then I'll be happy to answer these. But that may or may not be a feasible option for most manufacturers or most open source projects. So for those of you who haven't heard of it, the OpenSSF kicked off a project called Security Baseline about 2 years ago or so, trying to standardize a bunch of the open source project best practices in a larger and more holistic sense than something like Scorecard, which aims to really sort of rank security practices. Baseline instead sort of acts as a little bit more of a checklist of, have you thought about your access control policies, your build and release policies, your governance policies. Scorecard says nothing about governance. On the other hand, if only one person has the ability to do commits to the repo, and that person, there was a talk I was just seeing, talking about bus factor, that one person gets sick, what's going to happen? Some unapproved fork? That might be a security risk, if you're producing digital products in the EU. And more generally, if you're producing product and you discover that, hey, we're built on this core technology and it's no longer maintained, that's a risk. And so Baseline aims to help projects think about and assess those risks and improve their overall, reduce their level of risk for adopters. That did not go through. So SBOMs have been a hot topic. Kind of got to talk about them. So SBOMs might be part of how you show that you know what's in your software. They might be a part of Baseline. CRA requires them. But Baseline isn't really about what's the ingredients in your software. It's more making sure that the farm will continue to produce food, and that you know all the steps that go into getting the ingredients for your software. So yes, the CRA requires an SBOM, but manufacturers are the ones who have to put that together. And they may or may not need your project's help with an SBOM. So don't rush off and do SBOMs because CRA says, got an SBOM. But we're really trying to get healthy, long-lived open source projects because let me tell you, being both an open source and a closed source maintainer, nothing kills your buzz like, oh, hey, here's this project we adopted, we loved it, and now we have to migrate to a new thing. We have to assess what are all the options out here because that project had 2 maintainers and they both went off and got new jobs where they can't contribute to open source. And nobody else knows enough about the software to maintain it. Or all the maintainers burned out over the last 2 or 3 years and no PRs have been accepted to this repo. And nobody really noticed until one of its dependencies had a CVE. And someone said, could someone please just run Dependabot to patch this? Silence. And I'm sure anyone who's been maintaining software for a few years has had one or more of those experiences. The great thing about open source and package management is that it's so easy to publish a package. It's like getting a puppy. It's super exciting to play with the puppy. But you have to be committed to cleaning up puppy poop for the next 10, 15 years and dog poop. And sometimes your excitement gets the better of you. And the goal for Baseline is to have maybe less feral dogs roaming the streets and more happy, well-behaved dogs at the dog park. But Baseline also acknowledges not all projects are the same. A vulnerability in OpenSSL, well, that's going to be exciting. And your organization is going to have sleepless nights for the next couple weeks while you suss out all the different things that have built OpenSSL in different ways and fix the places where it can go wrong. A vulnerability in test format or emojis. It's a critical vulnerability. If you put in the right test string, it can completely take over your test framework. Okay, I guess we should fix that. Not the same as OpenSSL. Not all projects are OpenSSL. Most projects probably shouldn't be. A Baseline talks about 3 levels of projects. Level 1, stuff everybody should do. It's mostly pretty easy. I'll be going over not all of it because there's 13 or 14 items to look through, but I'll be picking out 4 that are a combination of funny and you should definitely do. You can get both. Level 2 is for projects that have at least 2 maintainers and have multiple actual users behind it. Not all open source has multiple actual users, at least directly. And level 3 is large projects that have a consistent set of users. These are the places where you should start thinking about security badges. You can do a security badge for any project you want. You can be like, hey, I vibe coded this thing over the weekend and it's got a security badge. I've done best practices. Okay. I would say don't waste your time. So Baseline isn't an audit. So you can do it, you can look through it all yourself. You can figure out yourself, am I doing these things? There's not like some open source certification board. Nobody wants that. Okay, there's probably some vendors who want to be that open source certification board, but Baseline does not want to be that. Some of Baseline's checks could be automated, but Baseline itself is not automated checks. It says you should have a way of doing this. There's many different ways to get there. That's okay. And baseline isn't a security badge. Maybe over time there will be good ways to communicate your baseline level. That's the hope, but it's not a get this badge and you're done. And my slides got a little bit screwed up. But let's go and take a look at what some of these actual helping baseline things are. So this was the first one that I found that was like, yeah, every project, this is level 1. This is for any project. It's got a little individual person up there to show it's level 1. Once you've got some open source, you put it up on GitHub or GitLab or something like that. When an attempt is made to delete the project's primary branch, the version control system must treat this as a sensitive activity and require an explicit confirmation of intent. What this is saying is, you should have branch protection on main that keeps people from deleting it. Sounds obvious? How many people know if they actually have that on all the open source that they maintain? I cannot raise my hand. I maintain a number of projects, and I haven't checked that all of them actually have branch protection to prevent deletion. It's not the default on GitHub, and yeah, it's exciting. So this is the kind of stuff that Baseline is worried about. This one is a little bit more intensive, but again, expected that anyone can meet it. When your CI/CD system uses a branch name in its functionality, you must sanitize and validate it prior to using it in the pipeline. If you don't, there was a lovely breach this summer in NX where someone was able to create a branch with a name that included spaces and stuff and steal their GitHub tokens and republish all their NPM packages, which got incorporated into other people's builds and started leaking tokens and everything into public GitHub repos all over the place. This is especially true for pull request target, but just in general, you should be validating your branch names look like something normal and reasonable. If it has a space, maybe just stop. Spaces in branch names, never a good idea. Another requirement, prevent unintentional storage of encrypted data or unencrypted data such as secrets and credentials in your version control system. Once you have put a credential into your version control system, it is no longer a credential, it is a thing you have to rotate and a huge pain in the butt. Also, if you're using GitHub, it's free to turn this on to prevent any of the secrets they recognize from getting pushed at all. You should put this stuff in get ignore and so forth. But like, these tools are free, but you have to turn them on. And so Baseline is a little bit about have you actually turn this stuff on. You want to be safe. That's one other part. This one is a little more interesting. I pulled it out in part because most of our goal for level 1 was producing requirements that you could validate automatically. And I flagged this because I'm like, I don't quite know how you validate this automatically. But the requirement is, while your project's active, if you have sub-projects that live in other repos, you should document that they're part of the larger project. So you actually know what a project is. One of the interesting things that came up is both best practices badge and scorecards tend to look at things on a repo by repo basis. But a lot of projects aren't one GitHub repo. I maintain Knative. The main Knative org has about 20 repos. We also have an extensions org, which brings another 60 or 70. That's all part of one project. They should all have the same general security posture. But if you don't actually know what's part of the project, it's hard to say, do they all have the same security posture? So this might be moving to level 2 because it's a little harder to check. But you don't get to say, oh, my project is totally secure, except that we have this one dependency that I also maintain that, that's where we put all the bad stuff that we're ashamed of. Not that I've done that, but if I had, it should be out of bounds. So that's a tour of some of the level 1 stuff. I'm going to show a couple of level 2 and level 3 stuff so you can see a little bit about what it means as you start to reach level 2. So level 2, you've got at least 2 maintainers. I know there's like 5 up there, but this is a project that has some maintainers and some active users who actually kind of depend on it. So the requirement is you need to document who on the project has access to the sensitive resources. Maybe you also want to review it periodically. That's not actually written as a requirement, but you need to at least write down who has access to this stuff, and it should be accurate. And this is one of those things where it may be harder for automation to fully validate it, but if you've got multiple people working on a project, you should know who's got keys to the house. Now we're getting to level 3 stuff, the big projects. So level 1 was don't check in your secrets. Level 3 is you should have a policy for how you manage the secrets because you've got a bunch of people working on this and they're going to need to be able to share this stuff. Maybe it's LastPass. All your secrets go in LastPass. They have a free for open source projects thing. Maybe it's GitHub Secrets is the place that you do it. Maybe you have a shared Google Doc that you have all the secrets written down in. Don't really care what it is. Just have a standard place so that when you add a new person or you take someone off the project, you know where they are and stuff can get replaced. Similarly, this is the big ones with lots of people depending on them. When you make a release, you should document how long it's going to be supported for. Gosh, wouldn't that be nice? It's also scary because it's a statement about the future, and the future is notoriously subject to change. So that's what Baseline's about. Should you rush off and do Baseline? No. But take a look at Baseline. Look at how you compare to it, and does it match about what you feel like? Is there stuff that you're like, oh, you know what? We should actually do that. Maybe sometime in the next month or 2, we should sit down and we should write down everyone who has access to the sensitive stuff, who has access to the bucket that we use to publish, our releases, who, has, access to the LastPass. Do we know someone who's an admin who can add new people? On a long-running project, sometimes you can discover that, oh wait, the last person who had access to that left. And then you have to figure out how to fix it. And what level of support, do you think that your users think that you're the same level that you would be? So Baseline is a nice way to have an easy way to communicate that kind of expectation. And as I promised at the start of the talk, we're all consumers. So unless you are one of the maintainers of a very, very rare project that is entirely self-hosted, you probably depend on other software. You may depend on your build process. You may depend upon it as a library dependency. Check in with your dependencies. Where do they think they are? If you think you're a level 3 project and you have a dependency on a level 1 project, that may not be a problem as long as you have a plan for when that person who's maintaining that out of love goes away. You have a plan to replace that. You're like, we're going to vendor it. It'll be fine. That's okay. But Baseline gives you a chance to communicate and to do that planning. And eat it one spoonful at a time. Don't panic and go out and do everything. But just a little bit now and then keeps you healthy. And as you're in your work, in your day jobs, be a responsible consumer. When you're picking projects, check to see, are they doing the stay healthy work? Contribute to them. That can be funding, if they've got a funding mechanism and you've got money that you can apply. Push to say, hey, can we get a small amount that we can contribute upstream to the open source that we depend on to keep it healthy? Can we do like $10,000 a year and get some good press out of it? That could be plenty depending on the size of your business. Alternatively, are there things that we should contribute to? These are critical to our business. We need to make sure that they don't disappear. maybe you should be invested. Easy stuff you can do. Show up, try to do some issue triage, answer some questions in their Slack or Discord. Also, remember the invisible infrastructure you're using, stuff like package registries, distributions. Are you paying for any of that? Should you be? Where does that fit into your support and consumer budget? It's great that there's all this stuff out there, and it's free, but it's only free as long as somebody is making sure that it's fixed. And we have to be those somebodies. So, thanks for coming to my talk. If you've got questions about Baseline or about getting healthy on any of this stuff, I would love to chat about it. I've been building some tools at the OpenSSF to try to make some of that easier, but that's not to say that's the only way to do it. And I just want to see us. We've had 40 years to fix supply chain security. Maybe the next 20 we can do better. It's not going to be fast, but we got to do it. And anyone who's got any questions, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, probably I already know the answer, but just to ask anyways, why not a score for a baseline? Just like scorecard.
Why is there not a score, like scorecard? There's a couple different reasons. Scorecard is very opinionated about you need to do these things in these ways, and that isn't always a fit depending on the type of project. And so baseline aims to have levels where you're at that level or you're not. If you think you're a level 3 project, but you don't have well-defined governance about how decisions get made, it doesn't matter all the other security stuff you do because the people who are consuming it don't know if you might suddenly do a left turn, and they have no way to know or participate in any of those discussions. And scorecard gives you really kind of a fine granular sense that is a little misleading, because it could be that it's 8 and 9 out of 10 on a bunch of areas that aren't really relevant to you, and then like one area that's super important to you, it's like a 3. And you get this average, and the weighting is never going to be right. And so baseline is just attempting to give you language to communicate about how mature do you think this project is. If it were me and I was thinking about depending on a level 1 project, I would say, okay, I have to assume that at some point I'll have to replace this.
Follow-up question.
Yeah.
That does bring the problem of assessing, right? Because performing self-assessments, probably biased the way that baseline is written, I guess. Mm-hmm. How would we do that?
We're working on that. If you're interested, the OpenSSF Baseline working group meets monthly. There's a larger orbit effort for interoperable tools that work on things like baseline, to be able to say, oh, well, there's 3 or 4 different ways that you could assess, baseline, and we suspect that the end result is going to be some combination of manual review and automated tooling. I think I gave 1 or 2 examples that might be hard to automatically figure out. And so we need to figure out ways to communicate these upstream and downstream security insights. Seems to have some of that information, but doesn't have everything. And we're working on it.
Thank you.
But you can just say, in your README, hey, we think we're baseline level whatever as a quick communication mechanism. And, there's a checklist that you can just go through and put checks and check it in if you want as a first pass. Okay. Go for it.
A great presentation. One question I do have is not as a maintainer, as a consumer of a big company. How do I use the baseline, right? Imagine if it's a level 3 project, level 1 project, especially with the CRA and the horizon. Mm-hmm. What's the best way to use baseline?
So as a consumer, what you're really interested in my opinion, is I'm consuming this service, whether it's source code maintenance or something else from an outside entity. What's the risk in my doing that? And going way back here. Here we go. If it's something like OpenSSL, where a vulnerability would be really bad, I'm probably going to want to look for a level 3 type project. If it's something small and it's peripheral to my business, level 1 might be fine. Like if there's an outage, if I just have to take it out, okay, and some small portion of my site is offline for a week or two while I rebuild it. Okay, not a big deal. On the other hand, if I'm building, life safety devices and there's a vulnerability in this software and no one can fix it, I'm going to have some substantial liability. And so like a level 2 project might not be acceptable to build into the hardware that I'm shipping, into the firmware that I'm shipping alongside my hardware. Think Nest, not picking on Nest for any particular reason except that they came to mind because I have them in my house, the Nest smoke detectors. Like if you have no internet, you expect the smoke detectors to still work. If someone does a huge packet scan on your network, your local Wi-Fi network, your smoke detectors should still work. Anything that's in there, I would expect to be pretty resilient. And if I was putting a level 1 project into a smoke detector, I would want to think about, what risks I was taking and how I could mitigate them.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I think it also assuming that all level 3 projects depend on only level 3 projects, though, right? If I'm depending on level 1,
well,
I'm not really level 3.
So again, this is about assessing risk. If I am a level 3 project and I depend on test formatter emoji from my CI, who cares? On the other hand, if I'm a level 3 project, and I'm going to take an example that has recently happened to us in Knative. We use the Material MK Docs documentation plugin. That plugin, or that documentation builder is being sunset and replaced with a new one, in part because it is a plugin on top of MK Docs, and MK Docs has stopped being maintained. And so that project, the Material MK Docs, said, well, we can either fork and maintain MK Docs, or we can rewrite the engine. And we're going to rewrite the engine, and it's going to be a new project. That's what a responsible level 3 project looks like, is, hey, we had this dependency. We thought it was level 3. It turns out it's not anymore, and we have to do something about it.
Yeah.
And that same is true for level 1 and level 2. So, yes, a level 3 project could depend on a level 1 project as long as they have an appropriate way to handle any oopsies that happen.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. And unfortunately, one of the things with Baseline because of this is that a score is not really as helpful as you want because you really have to engage with the subject matter. And that's frustrating in one sense because we'd like to just be able to throw computers at the problem, and instead we have to throw people and judgment at it.